Hello, welcome to this series of advanced workshops on the systematic quantitative literature review method. This complements an existing series of 4 videos where we outlined the original method and how to use it, gave the basic information. In this series of 4 workshops, we go through some of the stages in more detail, going through some of the challenges that people have found and clarifying some really neat strategies to make your literature review even more effective and powerful. So just a quick reminder about what is the systematic quantitative lit review. This is a method for analysing the literature that is systematic in terms of the method used to survey the literature, to select the literature that's used, usually papers, and the rules for doing so are explicit and reproducible. It's quantitative in that you're going to measure the amount of the literature, usually the number of papers, within different sections of the topic. It's comprehensive in that you're assessing different combinations of locations, subjects, variables and responses, and it's structured in the way that you work out about the literature in terms of selecting the literature, structuring categories and subcategories, collecting and analysing, and follows a series of clear steps, 15 of them. Now, more material on this method, of course, is available online on our website, so just go and search Systematic Quantitative Literature Review Griffith, and up should come the link to the website. And there's lots of support material there, papers using the method, videos about the method, example databases, etc., and links to the original paper outlining the method. If you do end up publishing a paper using this method, please do cite us. We're really keen to get that link out and for people to know about the method. So what are the challenges in being systematic? Well, whenever you use the word systematic with literature review, you're meaning a really specific thing. It's the rules about how you've selected the literature. And that is, they have to be, how you select that literature has to follow criteria that is rigorous, comprehensive, reproducible, and there are these very clear rules for what's in the literature review and what's not included, so that somebody else using those same rules and those same process should find exactly the same literature for the same period that you're searching. Now, one of the challenges that comes about this is people understanding what does that mean when you're going to be searching. And for this, I found one of the most effective ways is to use an analogy of being fishing. And that is, your aim in a systematic review is to catch all the specified fish, but not spend forever and minimise the amount of bycatch, the other fish you catch that you don't want. And that relates to some basic questions about the review. Why fish? What are the aims and research questions you want to find out about that literature? What fish? Are you going to be looking at papers, original research papers, or are you also going to be looking at other materials? Excuse me. Are you going to use books, theses, reports, other grey literature, other languages? Then also, what nets to use? Are there keywords that work? Now, for some disciplines and some topics within disciplines, there are really easy to use keywords, but in some others, it's going to be more challenging to work out those keywords. And what are you going to search? Titles, keywords, abstracts, the whole paper? Then the question is where to fish, which databases and how do they differ? And then finally, how long to fish? When have you found all the specified fish? When can you stop searching? So we're going to go through and answer each of these questions step by step. So the first of all is working out the keywords. And in some cases, there are really simple keywords that work very effectively. So this is examples from 2 papers that have been published using the method. So one of them was looking at community gardens, and in that case, the search words were community garden and then a combination of other terms including space, green, gardening, school, urban, food production, land use, place, planning, agriculture and people. Another one that was relatively simple was a paper looking at investigating employment following spinal cord injury. And in that case, they were looking at spinal cord injury or spinal injury was the key part of that part of the search. But then they had to use a combination of other terms to get to look at the employment. So vocational rehabilitation, occupational rehabilitation, employment, rehabilitation counselling, job, income, trajectory, and participants. And so they were using, again, this idea of some core words combined with others to cover the diversity of terminology that is used for that particular topic. Now, in some cases, you can get really complicated structures going, but very effectively use them to search. And this is a search criteria that was used for a paper looking at review of teamwork pedagogy in higher education, and particularly looking at small group work. And what they've done here is really beautifully set out that structure for how they've looked for those key words. So they've started off by saying, what is the broad concept for team? And as you can see in there, they've provided a whole lot of alternatives for the terminology that's used to mean teams. And for each of those words, they've linked them with the Boolean operator, the OR criteria. So teams, or teamwork, etc. Then they're wanting to say that they're looking at this in a higher education context. So then they've linked that using an AND criteria, so there have been brackets around the first group, and then there's an and brackets around a second group of words that are getting at the higher education. So higher education, or university, or college, or tertiary, or post-secondary, or faculty, or HE. But then within that, they're looking at a specific example about the teaching of teamwork. So then they use an AND statement to link to another bracket where they have all alternative words to look at what's meant by teaching. Teach, pedagogy, train, educate. Then they're focusing on students, so an AND to get to the word student, or students, student, etc. And then down to the skill. So and then words to mean the skill. Teamwork skill, the variance on that. Then another and, because they wanted to focus on some particular disciplines. So here they're going business, accounting, economic, management, finance, bank, humans or resources. So this is a really beautiful example of a really neatly conceptualized way of building those search words with the alternatives for each concept with ORs, then linking with ANDs to get to be able to use quite complicated searches to find a quite specific topic using quite a range of words and variants on words, synonyms that there are in that discipline. When you're doing that searching, one of the key parts of it is you have to be following a Prisma diagram. And this relates to the fact that if you are using a systematic search mechanism, so systematic literature review, most journals, and it's becoming more and more the norm to use this criteria. And this is the Prisma statement for preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis. And part of that talks about how you have to, what databases you have to search, what records you were removed, how you do that screening until down the bottom you end up with exactly the papers that are going to be left in that are the ones you're then going to quantify. And so we're going to go through talking about which databases, some of the components about how you search those and how you do those screening criteria. So which databases to use? Well, there are a whole lot of different databases and they vary a lot depending on discipline areas. These are at least 21 of them that we've found being used in different papers using this method. So different disciplines, different databases. So it's really important to work out which is the appropriate one for your literature. Each of them has advantages and disadvantages, and those are again relate to what literature they cover, but also the mechanisms that you can use to search them. Many of them use those Boolean operators, the and, or not statements that we were using in the example before. For the systematic quantitative lit review, I generally recommending using 3, and it's a bet hedging strategy. If you use 1, you are limited and it's only a part of the literature and there are limits on how the search functions. If you use 2 or 3, that gives you a more safe mechanism that you're more likely to be able to overcome the limitations of any one database. Now with that, university librarians and experts in your area, if you can, go talk to them. They can save you a huge amount of time and get much better results about selecting your database and also about what search terms work on those databases and how they function best. Now, one of the common ones that we recommend including in those is Google Scholar. Now, Google Scholar is the broadest net, the largest pond. And so what it does is it's going to get you a huge number of hits, a huge number of research papers, but it will also pick up a lot of grey literature and a whole lot of other material as well. And that's why we say it's a very broad net, large pond. Now with that, you can just put the words in, so you don't need to necessarily use those Boolean operators, the and, or not statements, because it automatically, in a sense, assigns them to your words and then prioritizes them. So when you're doing a Google search, and say you put in 2 words, say community garden, then the first examples that are going to come up on the first page are ones where those words combined have been used in the title. And it will go through that process. Then it will be looking for them in the abstract. Then it will be looking for examples where they've been used in the text. Then it would be looking where they might be separated out within the titles, etc. So the point about it is that they start on the first page is the ones that are most closely match your search criteria, and then they go away from that. Now, as a result, when you do that search, you'll get shocked because you might get a really large number of hits where it gives you examples at the top. Do not panic. So when you do one on community gardens at the moment, it's about 750,000 hits. But remember their priority. In the end, they're looking for any paper, grade literature, thesis, etc. that has the word community or the word garden in it. So no wonder it's going to have so many hits. So you can do advanced searches in Google Scholar, and there are some options in there. Again, have a look at how to do those. But one of the issues about how to say, have I found enough literature? Because you don't want to go checking all of 750,000 hits. And there's a really simple type of strategy you can use here, which comes from research about a strategy called mark recapture. And that is, if you go through the Google Scholars, and they've prioritized them by how closely they match your search criteria, and you have 10 citations or hits per page. If you've managed to search 5 pages in a row and none of the papers or objects in there, the hits, match your search criteria, then the probability that the next example will match your criteria is less than 1 in 50. And at that point, I think it's pretty reasonable to stop searching. So that's a strategy around using Google Scholar explicitly. And if you're using Google Scholar, we suggest this modification to the Prisma document. So what you do here is, because you're actually going to do initial screening in Google Scholar for whether the papers match the criteria. So you're going to be using the title and abstracts, and particularly the type of object. Is it an original research paper, or maybe it's grey literature, etc., to do that initial screening. So you're going to have the number of records from Google Scholar that you searched and you got to your 5 pages with no hits. So whatever that number is goes in the records from Google Scholar. And then you put in how many of them did you identify as being relevant for your review. Then you can have the other 2 databases, and then you put all the ones from the other 2 databases which are using more specific search criteria, plus the ones you identified from Google Scholar, put them into some program like EndNote to remove the duplicates. And then you can start doing more detailed screening of each of those papers, doing the initial record screening, where you might just use the title and the abstracts to say, are these relevant? Are they original research papers published in English, if that's the criteria you're using, on this topic, using this particular definition of the topic, whatever that specific rules are, then the number that's excluded, then the number that goes down where you have to actually check the full articles, how many get excluded when you do that, and then the number that go finally into the quantitative review. And here's some examples from some papers of how people have dealt with that. When they were trying to do a literature where it wasn't quite so clear about their inclusion, exclusion. So what they did, first of all, is they said they excluded those that for the search engine reason. So the paper only has the title, the abstract, and keywords in English, but they couldn't get the full text. Then they excluded ones that they categorised as not related. So it was not an academic article, so editorial materials, conference reviews, contents, etc. Then they also excluded one where the definition of the topic used in the paper did not match the one that they are using in their review. And then they had ones they excluded which were loosely related. So the paper was using the definition, but it only loosely was related to it. It wasn't directly focused on the topic of the review. So it was only used as an example, it was only included in the discussion and the need for future research, it was only used as a cited expression, or is only used in the keywords or references, but wasn't actually the major focus of the paper. The ones they included were ones that were partly related, where the paper focused on a general issue without mentioning a specific topic. The topic is only used to support the description of some of the challenges, issues or trends, and the topic is only one of several to be reviewed, surveyed or discussed, so it was part of a broader suite of topics. And then they identified those that were closely related. The research efforts of the paper are exclusively and specifically dedicated to the topic. So that's a really interesting way that they've set out where that boundary of what goes in and what goes out when they're reviewing the papers. Here's another example of how somebody has set out that keyword search, which databases, which keywords, and the criteria for inclusion and exclusion. And here they've said, okay, what's the review question? Then they've gone through the inclusion criteria. So title was one or more of sustainability dimensions, abstract and full text, at least 2 sustainable dimensions were included in it. Then they had exclusion criteria, book reviews, non-English publications, etc. Then they went through what was the literature they searched and what were the search phrases that they used, and then they talked about how they evaluated them. Same sort of approach here, where they've put the review question, the inclusion criteria, the exclusion criteria, how they went about searching the literature, what databases, what keywords were used, etc. Then they did a quality assessment, so how that they worked out which ones were important and the checklist for the types of methods used. Then they talk about what data they extracted, and this is starting to be that quantifying it. Then they talk about the methods they used to synthesize that data and present it. Now with it, more and more people are starting to use machine learning around this. I haven't tried it out, but just to let you know that there are machine learning options for doing systematic reviews. Here's an example of one that's publicly available. Give them a go if you want to. Let me know how it works. And hopefully this will soon be you with publishing your systematic quantitative lit review. Thank you very much, and feel free to listen on to the next video.